Hey everybody, welcome back to the What is Money show. I'm sitting down today with my friend Knut Svanholm. Knut is the author of 2 Bitcoin books, and he's currently working on a third. Knut, man, this has been a long time coming. Thanks for coming on, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Robert. I love your show, and I watch it as much as I can. I find your discussions with interesting people interesting.
Well, I really appreciate that. I'm glad you're finding it valuable. Could you please tell us the title of your first 2 books and the third one that you're working on?
The first proper book I wrote is called Bitcoin Sovereignty Through Mathematics, and the second one is called Bitcoin Independence Reimagined. And the third one I'm working on right now will be titled Bitcoin Everything There Is Divided by 21 Million.
Beautiful. I see the shirt representing the everything divided by 21 million. I have one of those myself too. I think it's a great meme, great logo that you originated, I believe.
Yeah, it's from an article I wrote called Deeper Down the Rabbit Hole, which turned into a little animated video, and the rest is history. Now it's a day as well, a Bitcoin Infinity Day on the 21st of August each year.
Nice.
You're supposed to stack the thing with that day is you celebrate the possibility, let's call it a possibility, that Bitcoin will eventually eat the entire world economy by stacking 21 times your normal daily stack. So whatever that is, you stack 21 times as much on the 21st of August.
Well, that I didn't know about that, but that will now be probably my most expensive shopping day of the year.
Yeah, and it's been immortalized in a art piece, a brilliant art piece by Fractal and Crypt. If you saw that, he made Bitcoin Infinity keys, public keys and private keys that he auctioned out on scarce.city. And the private key number 8 out of 21, he only made 21 of them. That sold for 1.05 Bitcoin, which was around $67,000 at the time.
Wow.
So yeah,
incredible. Yeah, no, his work is excellent. I've seen his other artwork. I think Sailor has one. Our friend Lewis over at Mimesis Capital has one. So yeah, he does really good work.
It's on the cover for my second book.
Oh, it is.
I have a long story with Fractal. You know, I saw the title of my first book on the full node statue, and I tweeted at him and asked him if he heard about it, and he said, "Yeah, I was listening to it while making the statue." So, so after that, we've collaborated a couple of times, and looking forward to meeting him in Miami later this year.
Very cool. Oh, so you'll be in Miami?
Yeah, that's the plan anyway.
Awesome.
If not, our overlords stop it somehow.
Well, I look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah,
well, yeah, you've written some great works. I've read your first 2 books. Clearly, I haven't read your third yet. It's not out yet. But I really, one of the things that I really enjoyed is that you just took a lot of novel angles on Bitcoin. It was much more of a philosophy book than it was, pure economic or computer science focused. It had both of those elements in them, but it seemed to be more of a philosophical work. Is that how you describe your books as well?
Yeah, and that's when I wrote the first 2, I didn't have any plan or anything. I just felt like writing. And well, the story is I wrote articles before I wrote the first book. And then I why don't I make these articles into a book? And so I did that. But that book was the only one attached to, with my name attached to it. So I thought I better write a proper book so I have something to be proud of. So I did that. I promised myself to write a page a day for a year, and the promise, I could keep the promise for 106 days, and then I was done with it. And I just it'll be a short book, but it feels done now. So I published it and brought 50 of them to Riga and gave them to some key people in Bitcoin, Baltic Hanebadger in 2019. And the rest is history. I just kept on doing that, and now I'm doing Bitcoin stuff full time. So
That's awesome.
To my amazement, it worked. And yeah, I like this philosophical angle because it feels like it's similar to your angle in many ways. I think Bitcoin needs more philosophers, because there's some really interesting stuff about like how time and morality and all sorts of things that connect to an absolutely scarce asset that is, holds its value through space and time, an energy that does not lose value when you send it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And what, there's two things there. One, a lot of people ask me, how can they get into Bitcoin full time? Because once you get into Bitcoin, really get into Bitcoin, one of the first things you want to do is shed your fiat job and like be full time into Bitcoin. And that's a difficult transition for a lot of people. But I think the path you just described, I mean, that's what got me here. It's, you really need to write ultimately. I think you need, falling down the Bitcoin rabbit hole involves a lot of reading, a lot of listening. I think you then need to take what you learn, filter it through your own lens in writing. And then my experience, at least, is once you start writing, people want to talk to you about what you wrote. So then you're reading, writing, talking.
Yeah,
and then that just starts to open doors, and it opens doors continuously. Like people still come to me talking about things I wrote 3 years ago. I'm sure it's the same here for you.
Yeah. And it's just, and all I had to do was just start doing it.
Exactly.
that's the key. And like I was inspired by, when I started writing, I was inspired by Taleb's Skin in the Game. And that's why I didn't use a pseudonym or anything, because in that book he describes how people who do great things, or like, if you want to be as good as you can at something, you need to have something to lose. And I think there's a lot in that, because if you expose yourself and like you don't become vulnerable, you become better, because you need to be, and you need to really read up on stuff, because you will end up in interviews and you will have to answer hard questions every now and then. And so I'm trying to do that. I mean, we're all humans and we're all flawed, and we all want to enjoy life too, and not just delve into books all day. But being in this has certainly like awoken something inside me, and some curious parts of my brain that have been latent for too long.
So what I'd like to highlight again is that the path you laid out, it's simple, and that you really just need to get to work, right? You need to write the page a day or whatever your thing is. But it's not easy at all. It's one of the hardest things. I think writing is still the hardest thing I've ever done. Like, it's so difficult. I haven't managed to write a book yet, so I'm not even on your level.
Your article, 2 of your articles are my among my top 5 articles in Bitcoin ever, and that's Masters and Slaves of Money and Bitcoin and the Number Zero.
Oh, thank you so much.
I love them. And Bitcoin and the Number Zero was partly inspired one of the chapters in the new book, because I described Bitcoin as element 0 on the periodic table.
Interesting.
Because it's an element without mass. It's it's a reverse engineered chemical element.
Wow. I really look forward to reading that. The second thing I wanted to echo here is, your statement that we need more philosophy and or philosophers in Bitcoin. I agree. I think is very important, because the way I see it is Bitcoin is shattering worldviews. Like, everything you thought you knew about the world, once you start studying Bitcoin and going down the rabbit hole, forget about it. Like, it breaks things, right? It breaks the thing you thought you knew, the perspective you thought you had fashioned and created over time that made a lot of sense on whatever, on government or on money, all these different things. Bitcoin's probably going to break that. And so if we define philosophy as like this inquiry into the fundamental nature of things, the visualization I have is like, people have a worldview, Bitcoin's shattering all or parts of it. People then need to reestablish their anchor points to reality, right? They need to ask why to get to the bottom of things. and rebuild their worldview. So that's what, I mean, that is the role of philosophy. And I think that's why it's so important in Bitcoin.
Yeah, but then again, once you get it, and once you see what it does to your worldview, and like how many old things you have to relearn, it's easier, way easier to understand reality and why reality is the way it is, and especially human societies, why they are the way they are. It's much easier to see through the curtain and see the man behind it and who's pulling the strings and why. It all starts to make sense once you see inflation as the inflationary currency as the main problem in the world.
Yes.
That's like key here.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin like pointed out that we've never had anything that was absolutely scarce and absolutely divisible at the same time before, and teleportable. So we haven't been able to trade to 100% yet. There's never been a free market until this happened. And that's like, yeah, it changes the way you look at everything.
Yeah, it's mind blowing. And the new view I have on this is we could almost say that civilization itself didn't really start until Bitcoin. Because we always had, as we were talking offline, again, if your tax rate is 100%, then you are by definition a slave, right? Exactly. All the fruits of your labor go to someone else, go to a tax authority. Well, today we all have some tax burden. We all have some percentage effective tax rate. So everyone in the world is some percentage of a slave to the state.
Yep.
And it's all because we don't have Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is what fixes all that. It's this, which is something we want to get into now. Like, it's the ultimate property, ultimate form of ownership.
Yeah, the first form of ownership, even.
Yeah.
That reminds me, one of my most popular tweets ever was exactly that. Bitcoin is not a threat to civilization; it's the beginning of civilization, to civilized society, the beginning of civilized society. Anyway. Yeah, to your point there about slavery, you can also view it as a partial death sentence, since someone is stealing your time. And this is one of the things I get into in the book, like the importance of time and the scarcity of time, how that drives everything. Because the limitations of your days on this earth is what gives your life value and meaning. There's nothing else. If you were immortal and indestructible, so you would live forever, then you could always postpone every action till later. And then you wouldn't have to take any action, and you wouldn't have to interact with other people at all, and you wouldn't have to do anything. You wouldn't have to make any moral decisions. You wouldn't have to make, there would be no value in anything. No trade-offs. And which means that everything would have an infinitely low value. And when you have a strictly limited amount of time, everything can have a theoretical limitless value. And Bitcoin is the perfect reflection of that, since it's absolutely scarce and we have to share them amongst ourselves, amongst each other. Then there is a potential for them to become infinitely valuable to at least one person. I mean, value is a subjective thing. This is the core insight that leads you down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, it really is interesting. And, I think this concept of property itself is something that's so misunderstood in the world that, typically you say the word property, and at least in the US, people immediately think real estate. They just think it's land, right? And then they think there's almost like this blind spot where it's like, oh yeah, you just own the house. Like, of course, I have the piece of paper that says I own the house. They don't understand the mechanics behind that, like what enforces your property right in that property. And it's not just land, it can be anything. So this idea that property is not a thing, it's the relationship between the owner and the thing, and that relationship is preserved at the leisure of the state. And this is true for every form of property other than bearer assets, right? Something you can hold and defend and secure.
Yeah.
That's very important, because then the screwed up thing is you have the state in charge of preserving property rights, but then it's also almost oxymoronic because itself preys on those property rights. It's like the thing that it's charged, its reason for existence, it turns around and consumes its own seed crop or something, if you will. And that's why I think it's just been we've had this civilizational boom and bust across history, that hopefully Bitcoin fixes.
Yeah, and I know that it goes even deeper than that, reality is the relationship between objective reality and our subjective thoughts. What we experience is the relationship between those two. And you can't even know to which extent one creates the other.
Right.
You can't know if what's in here is measuring something out there,
yes,
or if it's creating something out there. You
right.
cannot know to which extent that happens. And you like Rene Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." That's like a core, a good starting point. The only thing you can actually know is that someone is thinking, some entity is thinking something somewhere.
Yeah.
Because the thought itself is proof of the thought's existence, but it's not proof of anything else but that.
Right.
So that's I tried to lay this out in the book, and I'm thinking a lot about it and trying to form some well, I'm trying to make it not too New Age-ish, but more praxeologically correct. And as I view it, there are, your brain sees these other entities that seem to function the way you function, like other human beings, that they behave as if their brains operate in the same way that yours does, that before you do anything, there's a value judgment in your head. You put that thing that you want to do on top of the list of things you want to do, and then you do it. Like if I want to take a sip of this glass of water, I do, but if I want to keep on talking, I do that instead. So now keep on talking came higher in my personal value hierarchy. Yeah. And you see these other entities, other people, and they behave as if they have these value hierarchies too. Now you can interact with these other beings in two ways. You can interact with them voluntarily or forcefully. So you can in effect trade with them or use violence against them. There is really nothing else. There's the exchange of information, which is trade, by the way. We're trading with each other right now. We're exchanging information, and not only information. We are exchanging a lot of things by just looking at each other. I can look at your so there's so much you can extrapolate information from just listening to my dialect. I can see the art piece behind you there and start drawing conclusions which are probably wrong, but anyway, the point is there's a plethora of trading going on whenever we interact with another person. And like I said, the two ways we have to interact is the violent way and the non-violent way. And the non-violent way is, of course, the civilized way. And Bitcoin takes away the profit motive to a large extent from the violent way. And this is why I think it's so beautiful and so like why I can't stop thinking about it, because it will make the world such a better place that we can't even fathom the beginning of what this is. It's removing the need to act in violent ways or forceful ways with others.
No, so I agree completely, and it's that's what we've been locked into through pretty much our entire existence, and it's also what we've been trying to evolve beyond, right, with these concepts like rule of law, other means of nonviolent dispute resolution, arbitration, all these things, because violence ultimately is expensive. It's expensive and risky to both parties. So it makes economic sense to get beyond it, right? And we've made a lot of headway, actually, right? We're much less violent than we were as cave people, presumably. But Bitcoin is like that ultimate incentive to really take us to, like we said, the next level of civilization, or perhaps even the beginning of civilization itself. So one thing I'd like to throw out here is, like, you make the point, all action is an expression of value. Like, you can't even avoid it. You can't know it is in others, but we know in ourselves we're making a value judgment, and then we act according to that value judgment. You should probably check out this series I've been doing with Mike Hill on the book Leela.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've heard you talk about that book a lot, and I'm planning to read it. I haven't looked at that yet. I've seen your Hillebrand series, which I recommend to absolutely everyone in the world, and a couple of others. The one with that, I don't remember his name now, but another guy that talks about
John
how much
Vervaeke.
Vervaeke, yeah.
And
Yeah, that's
this
an
is the
interesting
term
guy too. Yeah.
we got from Vervaeke, actually, is the term transjective, which is the relationship between, or I guess I don't know if it's the relationship between subject object. It's almost like something transcendent of subject object. The example Vervaeke gave was adaptation. Like, is adaptation objective or is it subjective? It's like, well,
yeah,
it's subjective to the extent that the conscious agent is choosing what to do and is being influenced by their environment, but it's objective in the sense that the environment has a real effect on the subjective decisions of the agent. So adaptation as a phenomenon is something that is neither objective nor subjective. It's transjective. It's something, and he makes this deeper point that all identity even arises, it's co-determining. Like, to be a dancer, you have to be dancing. Yeah. And to have an arena that is a dance floor, then it has to be danced upon. So there's this interesting thing where I think subject object gives us blind spots, and we go into that. The person goes into that in his book, and we just explore it.
I heard that, and transjective is a fascinating word. I like the word intersubjective, which Yuval Noah Harari lays out in *Sapiens*, which is a book I didn't like very much, but I like that idea, and how intersubjective fantasies, or whatever you may call them, is the very thing that elevated humans above all other species on Earth, because that made us able to form groups larger than Dunbar's number, which is the maximum of connections you can have in your head, like the maximum amount of people you can know. If you look at bonobos or chimpanzees, they very rarely form groups larger than 150 individuals. But we could, because we could imagine that there was a god to begin with, or an afterlife. And as soon as there was ceremonial barrier and an afterlife, the sociopath leaders could fool the young 18-year-olds of the village to go to war and wage war on the tribe next door and kill them all, and a great reward would await them in heaven. So in that sense, by fooling people that their time wasn't limited, that they had an afterlife to look forward to, they could dilute the value of the perceived value of their lives, so that they would give their lives up for this supposed higher cause.
Interesting.
And I find that so scary, because every appeal to authority or a higher power or a higher cause in this sense, it is by itself diluting the value of your subjective meaning of life. You can decide for yourself what the meaning of your life is. You don't need someone else to tell you that. like Terry Pratchett said the problem with an open mind is that people would come along and try to put stuff in it. And I will always say an open mind isn't worth anything if you're not intellectually honest. Right. And that can require you to slay a lot of old ideas that you had. And nowadays I view, like, the idea of an afterlife as existential inflation, if you will, like how, and while it probably gave a lot of people hope, there was no way of proving if that hope was real or not, but their leaders could use that belief in other people for their own, to reach their own ends. To them, it was a means to an end. And the ends always justify the means. And so I think what the central banks are doing today is effectively the same thing, but they lure us into believe that we can reach a higher state of being or happiness here and now in our own lifetime, if we just use their money and take the new loan and like keep using this, keep staying in the fiat hamster's wheel, if you will. And it's basically the same thing. It's everything that controls other people starts by diluting the value of what that person thinks of his life, like his time here on earth. It's a regular fiat job is that too. If you get paid this sum every month if you just stay in this office for 8 hours a day. 8 hours a day is a long time, and most people should probably quit their jobs and start valuing their time higher than that. Because they're even if you have a high salary, it's probably not what your true worth is. Everyone is worth something to someone else. You just need to find your specific purpose, and it's more valuable than you think. Yeah, I firmly believe that.
I agree with that completely, and it's bad. It's almost like we've conditioned ourselves to live in some form of captivity in this corporate office environment, at least, largely in the US. I've walked that path, actually. I did the CFO thing for a while and earned a high salary and all that. And it does not make you happier. It makes it worse. You're neglecting parts of your humanity, I think, walking that job. Or walking that line rather. So to that lens you're talking about, I guess this is almost like patriotism or nationalism is some kind of false god, because that's what we have people giving their life for today, right?
Yeah, and this is I used to be a very militant atheist, but I've come to appreciate the Christian view of the state a lot more after reading libertarian literature. But I still think there's something missing, because I can understand the argument that democracy is just another religion, and probably the worst religion, because if your worship is towards some invisible guy in the sky, at least it doesn't affect other people that much. But if your worship is, you worship whatever a popularity contest said was the perfect candidate for governing you, then that has a lot of negative effects on your fellow man, which is what we're living in now. And I believe all democracies are doomed in the long run, because collectivists will win elections. Elections by themselves are an immoral thing. To get back to the thing about religion, there is many Christians say that as soon as you remove religion, people will worship something else, and that is worse, and that's why Stalin and stuff happened. But I think I still have hope that there's a way for people to find their own spirituality, if you will, or their own purpose, their own meaning, without being influenced by any fiction, be it organized religion or organized crime or organized government, which are to me, all those three are very similar. So yeah.
So do you believe then just in total, I would assume, if you're a libertarian to some extent, you agree with freedom of religion, right? People can just believe whatever they want.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at. It's like it shouldn't even be a matter of political consideration whatsoever. It's like people should be free to discover whatever moral code and or useful fiction suits them. And that's it.
Just don't try to shove it down my kids' throats.
Exactly.
That's right. That's the basic thing. Do whatever, believe whatever you want. Tell your kids whatever you want.
Yeah.
Just don't enforce it on other people.
Yeah.
That's back to property rights and morals.
Mm-hmm.
What we can boil all these conversations down to is that we're trying to, as libertarians and as free thinkers, we want to rid ourselves of as much violence and forceful coercion as possible.
Mm-hmm.
That can never be 100% achieved, but it should always be the aim should always be that to remove violence from the equation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you agree with me to 100% on that.
Of course, yeah. It makes everyone richer and more satisfied, frankly.
Yeah. And if you think about it, morals and ethics, it's easy. Everyone knows it from their schoolyard years.
Yeah.
When you were at the schoolyard playing with the other kids, you knew that it was bad to take something from them, and you knew that it was bad to beat them up.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids who did were called bullies, and nobody liked them.
And they grew up to become politicians.
Yeah, exactly. What you never reflected over when you were in your school years was who built the school. Why did they build it? Why did they force you, take you away from your parents and put you in this prison for 8 hours a day? Why did they do that?
Hey, everybody. As you've no doubt learned by watching this show, Bitcoin is the single most important asset you can own in the 21st century. And one of the most important companies in Bitcoin today is NYDIG. NYDIG's mission is to get Bitcoin into the hands of as many people as possible. One of the ways they are accomplishing this mission is by empowering banks and financial technology companies to offer their own Bitcoin products and services. As a true game changer in the industry, NYDIG is safely unlocking the power of Bitcoin for forward-thinking individuals and institutions alike. Led by Robbie Gutman, Yin Zhao, and Ross Stevens, NYDIG has absolutely exploded onto the Bitcoin scene recently and has quickly become a leader in this space. So, whether you are a professional investor looking for asset management services or a company looking to white label your own Bitcoin product or service, consider NYDIG your single source solution for everything Bitcoin.
Everyone knows what's moral and what's ethical in their school years, but they rarely reflect on why they're there in the first place. And an immoral system put them there. A popularity contest every 4 years doesn't make theft or coercion more moral. That's just not how it is. And I view politics on a scale from, if you have an origo in the middle as 0 points, all politics are to the left of that, because you can't do any politics without financing them somehow, and all the state gets all its money from coercing people into paying. It's not a Patreon or anything like that, or like a Kickstarter. Like, wouldn't that be great? A world with voluntary government financed by Kickstarter, or the likes of Kickstarter. Maybe Kickstarter is a bad example. It's like the MySpace of crowdfunding these days, right? Anyway, where were we?
No, it's excellent point. And I'm reminded of that Nietzsche quote that I love, because he just sums it all up. Nietzsche, I think he said he philosophizes with a hammer. So like some of his sentences are just really powerful. And this is one of them. He says, everything the state has is stolen. Everything it says is a lie.
Yeah.
I'm like, that pretty much sums it up. Like we monopolize force. Really, it's just the victor, right? It's whoever's emerged victorious through some armed struggle, then extracts tribute from the vanquished.
Yeah.
And we've just been conditioned under that as like, that is the normal way of things in the world. So you're born onto some piece of land that someone conquered, and you need to pay the conqueror tribute, and we call it taxation. It's crazy.
Yeah. And just a disclaimer here, if anyone is watching who is not a hardcore libertarian, that Bitcoin can make you get to try libertarianism with Bitcoin, because you can really I wouldn't use the word circumvent, but you can stop giving a shit about these forceful interactions and start using Bitcoin instead. To a certain extent, you don't need to do it to 100%. You can just put some, get off zero, put some in Bitcoin and try it out. See how much better it is. Yeah.
Yeah, you just effectively are immunizing yourself from the opinions or whims of others. And what else could it mean to be free other than to live independent of other people's value judgments, right? To live a life in accordance with your own value judgments.
Exactly. And to have a proper ruler with which you can measure other people's value judgments,
right?
Because that's the tricky part. Economics is not an exact science. It's not a science at all in that sense, because value is really subjective to each person and to each second of that person's life, and it's only applicable to scarce things. And we have no way of knowing what other people want, except for if they tell us what they want, or through a price signal, which is the market's way of showing you what people want.
Yes.
And that is why communism doesn't work. That's the main reason, because the pricing signal is fucked up. It's not an incentive problem. It's a pricing signal problem. It's an informational problem.
Yes.
And getting back to information, this is, I love deep diving into these rabbit holes, because information, back to physics and chemistry here, if you want, and element zero. It's an idea I got from a German Bitcoiner called Jörg Hemsdorf, who made an excellent speech at the Value of Bitcoin conference 2 years back about, and I took that and I crammed it into my new book. And the basic idea is, the chapter is called Alchemy. And yeah, this is a pretty long story, but bear with me. The alchemists of old, they wished to, they were searching for a way to make gold from cheaper substances. So a cheap way to make gold. What they didn't realize was that in doing so, they would have destroyed the value of gold, because the value of gold is connected to how hard it is to find in the Earth's crust, the stock to flow ratio, which every Bitcoiner knows about. So gold has a high stock in comparison to the flow of new gold onto the markets. So the very thing that makes it expensive is that it's expensive to mine for new gold. So what the alchemists should have been looking for is, they should have tried to reverse engineer an element instead and look for the properties of gold, the properties that make gold good money. And there are a couple. It needs to be a stable element. It needs to have at least one stable isotope, and it needs to be scarce. It needs to be divisible, and in our day and age, it needs to be very light, because we will need to transport it somehow cheaply to other places, and it will need to be able to bind energy, and it will be it would need to be hard to destroy.
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine an element that looks like that. What is that element? Well, if you zoom in on an atom, they're made out of protons and neutrons and electrons, right? And the electrons are, that's one of the fundamental particles that make up the universe. And the protons and the neutrons are made up of fundamental particles too.
Mm.
And these, in the quantum realm, which is a strange place. I'm not a physician, a physicist, so I don't know that much about quantum mechanics, but I know a bit, and I know that these things behave very strangely, and that the smallest fundamental particles, they are all found, and the distance is called the Planck length. It's the smallest distance we can measure, and the measurement is just a 1-bit information thingy. It's once it's measured, it becomes either a 1 or a 0, a yin or a yang, or a yes or no. So it's a 1-bit. It's an answer to a 1-bit question, basically. At the base layer of everything, and these things pop up in the Higgs field, which is a vast ocean of nothingness and particles that pop up everywhere, and they're in a qubit state before we measure them. So they have a probability, a higher probability of being in one of the states than the other, but they're not actually in one of these two states until we measure them. And there's one theory, the many worlds theory, that says that each time one of these particles decides if it's a 1 or a 0, a whole new universe is created. So that for every single decision of every single particle, there's a new universe created in the multiverse, and which consists of like infinite numbers of, but there are differently sized infinities, which is right. These concepts are so weird to wrap your head around, but and it ties down to like if there wasn't a multiverse, and if the universe as what we live in was deterministic, then we would have no free will. There would be no entropy, and therefore no free will. Nothing would matter. And right. you could philosophize on this endlessly. You can think of your conscious as the timeline that survives the multiverse, and that other versions of yourself branch off and die. You know what I mean? So there's a chance that you're living in a timeline that to you subjectively will go on forever, because it's the one you survive in. Right. Anyway, I'm not trying to get all too new agey here, but the point is that at the core of everything is information, and so information is all we have. All the elements are information. And we can either use that productively and trade with each other, or we could destroy it. Anyway, we're back to, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Bitcoin, the element, it would have to be, so if you're looking for the properties of gold, you're looking for something that can bind energy, but that requires a lot of energy to be destroyed. It will have to survive things. So how would you do that? And the answer is like the hashing algorithm and the difficulty adjustment, and basically Bitcoin, because this would have to be an element without protons or neutrons, because it would have to be weightless, so it can be moved around. So this is how you find element 0. It will have to be a purely informational element. So the info, which in turn means that the information about the element is the element. So when you find the hash of a Bitcoin block, you have a proof that you've found the element, and that is the element. There is no difference between knowing and owning. So we've found a physical thing that does not exist in physical reality. Right, exactly. Which is just mind-blowing, right? Yeah. It's something subjective that can manifest in the physical world in a way that nothing ever had before it. So and in that sense, since it would be weightless, it would be the lightest particle, and it would be element 0 on the periodic table, because that's just because it's poetic. But anyway, and when you have an element like that, everything gets turned on its head, because there's no link between subjective experience and objective reality, which is tangible, which you can touch, like it's actually there, and you can see it do its thing in reality. And this is what falling down the Bitcoin rabbit hole is. And experiencing it firsthand, which is what we're doing. Anyway.
Yeah. Wow. That's a fascinating thesis on Bitcoin I'd never heard before. And it's, I think Gigi wrote a piece about this where like Bitcoin is the first thing that the map actually is the territory.
Exactly. Yeah. And he's a huge inspiration too. I try to talk to him as often as I can, because I just love his way of thinking. And he had a conversation, I think it was with you, about Bitcoin being akin to the speed of light, in that the closer you get to the speed of light, the heavier you get.
Right.
Yeah, there's an analogy to be made there as well.
To the difficulty adjustment, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, I mean, this is the unification of digital and physical reality.
Yeah.
Or we could say digital and analog, or discrete and continuous. It's interesting. It's like we almost opened a wormhole or something. It's and it seems to only be possible once, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Planet,
this is the distinction here. I make this point as often as I can. This is a discovery. It's not an invention. It can only be done once, because that's the thing. Like before Bitcoin, everything on a computer was copyable, and it still is, by the way.
Right.
And that's just thinking about something that couldn't be copied in the informational realm is it's like thinking of a time machine that can't work, because it will create a lot of paradoxes.
Right.
And like when I talk to you here, not just only because we're recording, but there's no way for me to send the information without copying the information.
Right.
If I use my mouth and my tongue and my vocal cords, I am effectively copying something from my brain and out into the. So there is nothing in reality that can't be copyable, that can't be copied.
Right.
Except for Bitcoin, and that is because Bitcoin is not a thing. It's an agreement between people that these are our rules, and these are the rules we play by, and they are set in stone forever. They're fixed, unless we all agree that they aren't, and that's not going to happen. So they are fixed in every practical sense of the word. They are fixed, and this is what makes it so unique, because it's just an agreement. And once you see it like that, it's just an agreement, and it's a discovery. You know, I hate to use the word, but it really becomes inevitable. And
no, I there. So it's all, and this is my view here is, well, influenced by a lot of things, I guess, but it's all patterns, right? Everything's pattern. Like if you say, okay, information is the primary substrate of the universe, I would modify that slightly and say it's data, actually.
Yeah, because, but that's the same thing. To me, those are the same.
Well,
words.
Here's the difference in my mind is that data becomes information once consciousness has patterned it. Once consciousness has, because you could have one man's information could be unknown to someone else.
Okay, right? But I'm using information in the physics sense of the word, and there it's exactly the same as data.
Right.
But you're right. Information could be interpreted data.
One of the ways I look at it is, so the whole universe is pervaded by entropy.
Yeah.
And then once consciousness patterns that entropy into a way that it's somewhat predictable or understood, I guess, the pattern of consciousness has now assimilated the pattern that it discovered in nature, that becomes information. So information is like entropy flowing into from the unknown into the sphere of the known.
Yeah.
And there's a great book on this called The Information, actually, by James Gleick, where he describes that, like, information is surprise. Like,
did you ever, okay, go on.
When the data is surprising to you, it's informing you. But once you've established a pattern, right? If I know, what's an example here? If you divide a certain number, I can't think of it right now, but you get the repeating decimal, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like 1.67 forever. Well, the third 7 is not informing you any more than the 43rd 7. So there's no new information there. Like, you've already, the pattern has been recognized. So anyways, it's everything's pattern, it's interacting patterns. But Bitcoin is really strange in that it's like we have created, again, back to this term, like a useful fiction, right? We're kids playing imaginary, and then we grow up playing imaginary, only we use serious play and imaginary structures like, this is covered in Sapiens in depth. Nation states, human rights, civil liberties, money, all these useful fictions to scale human cooperation.
Yeah.
But the trick is to make those useful fictions as true as possible, or I guess embedded with as much truth as possible.
Yeah. And
Bitcoin seems to be that, right? It's like there's a useful fiction characterized by 100% veracity, effectively. Like, it's constantly, that's all it's doing. It's auditing itself all the time. It's throwing away dishonest blocks. It's reaching consensus. And so it's like, it's a pattern. We've created a pattern that's now independent of consciousness, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would even say that it's a new life form, and we're in a symbiotic relationship with it.
Yeah. Right.
And
you can define life form, by the way, in the physics sense, any open system that imports energy and exports entropy. And that's exactly what Bitcoin's doing.
Yeah. And there's the Mycelium and Bitcoin article. There's a chapter in my first book about this. Many people have compared it to life form before. But I view it a bit differently these days because did you see the Venom movies with Tom Hardy?
No, I saw part of it, but not all of it.
Yeah, but you know what it's about. No, but it's about an alien symbiote that becomes a part of him, and they have this inner dialogue all the time, and that's where the humor comes from. But Bitcoin is that it's a symbiote because it enters your mind, and this. I'm working on this chapter in the new book right now, by the way, about memetics. And you know that Richard Dawkins coined the word meme in the Selfish Gene back in the 70s, and how ideas have evolution, like follow evolutionary patterns, just like genes do.
Right.
And this ties into so much, and why Bitcoin. Why Bitcoin, the coffee mug, and Bitcoin, the t-shirt, Bitcoin, its users, Bitcoin, the technology, Bitcoin, the network, Bitcoin, the token, Bitcoin, the Peter Schiff, Bitcoin, whatever. It's all interconnected, and its success as one fuels its success as the others, as all the others, because it's all part, they're just different aspects of the same phenomenon, which is an idea about a fixed set of rules, which we can all play by if we want to. And that's the saying everything is good for Bitcoin is really true in that sense, because an idea can propagate between human brains without any regard for the host. The idea of suicidal bombing, for instance, that has managed to survive through generations, even though that everyone who thought it was a good idea blew themselves up at some point. But the idea survives because they usually die in a spectacular way, which other fanatics take note of. So the idea survives while the suicidal bomber dies. And this is so that can be compared to the stinger of a honeybee. The honeybees die after using their stingers. but the hive survives, and therefore the gene that created the stinger, the suicidal, the what, kamikaze honeybee, that gene survives. But Bitcoin, it not only does it not kill the host, it helps the host in a plethora of ways. So it's very good for the host. So as soon as the idea has taken root in your brain, you start becoming Knut Svanholm or Robert Breedlove. You start falling down the rabbit hole. You start talking about it all the time. You start like you become an advertising machine for it, whether you want to or not, because you find it awesome. Of course you do, because you understand it to some extent and you're excited. And I think in the future, not only will Bitcoin help us survive, or we help Bitcoin survive, but we couldn't survive without it in the future. We will have to accept nothing but Bitcoin as payment for stuff, because everyone will know that this is the only thing that matters. If you're getting paid for anything, this is the only true representation of human time. This is what I want as payment. Otherwise, whatever I do is just going to the pockets of some. It gets funneled into the hands of the elite, and I don't want that. I want to be able to store it, and get some interest on it, because technology gets better and better. Anyway,
yeah, it's almost like it being this digital organism, or whatever we want to call it, a new form of life. It actually is contributing to the cohesion of humanity as a single organism, right? Like we've been struggling amongst ourselves. We have, like today, the earth is divided by all these imaginary lines we call nations. And, the US is imperializing others. We're fighting amongst ourselves. Politics and violence and fiat pervade. But the great promise of Bitcoin is to provide kind of a unifying force beneath all of that, right? Where we can all just agree to a standard of value that's equitable and fair to all. It's rooted in work, right? So it shifts all of the human incentives towards making wealth versus taking wealth.
Yeah.
And so there, it's like the promise of it, at least, is that it could bring, maybe not world peace, that sounds too utopian, but it can make us more peaceful on balance, right?
Yeah, and in the process, it takes away the profitability of violence, as we discussed before. Yeah. So that's, I really do believe that it can bring world peace, at least on a large enough time scale. If you zoom out long enough, that's where the vectors point to. So back to the life form thing. Imagine that a part of your Bitcoin, or all of your Bitcoin, they're stored in a seed phrase in your head. You've memorized your 24 words. If you die with those 24 words, those Bitcoins are lost forever. The chances that someone else finds the key is so small that it can be disregarded. Like it's like finding a needle in the Andromeda galaxy. You don't have enough time to look for it. So your Bitcoins die with you. Even if you've stored if you have them on a hardware wallet that only you know where it is, and it's really well hidden, that will deteriorate over time and disappear. So your Bitcoins can really die with you. Can take them with you when you die. And in that sense, they are truly, you are your Bitcoin in that sense. If you memorize your seed phrase, and if they exist nowhere else than in your brain, you are your Bitcoin. There's no way to distinguish you from your Bitcoin.
Right.
And
you are your own hardware wallet or meatware wallet.
Yeah, but more than that, you are a specific, very specific, down to the decimal, to the 100 millionth decimal point part of the Bitcoin network. You are that part. And I find this so beautiful and so mind-blowing. So I can't stop thinking about it. I'm not done thinking about it, so I don't know what, like, I'm trying to think of what it means and what it will lead to, but it's hard, man. It's hard to, but it I'm sure it will redefine everything and make us rethink everything about how we interact with each other, and it's so much more profound than we've barely scratched the surface on this thing.
Yeah.
It's imagine, for instance, you know Hal Finney cryo-freezed his head, right?
Yep.
Imagine his frozen head before he cryo-freezed it, that he memorized 24 words. I know the BIP 39 thing wasn't implemented when he did, but anyway, let's say he memorized his entire private key.
Right. And
they resurrect him in 300 years, and he somehow remembers it after having been resurrected. Then we've erased the line, we've blurred out the line between life and death. Because we as human beings, we are very good at, categorizing stuff and putting it into neat little boxes. That might not be correct at all. Like, how do you define life? How do you define death? How do you define anything, really? Well, we have to, in order to be able to communicate and to not get lost in space. But Bitcoin is blurring out that line again, because we might have to redefine a couple of very basic notions about existence.
Right. No, I agree completely, and it's back to this. This is what I'm thinking about a lot recently: is useful fictions. McKenna has this quote that all language is a lie, right? We're just arbitrarily assigning some common experience, like to the protocol of language, so that we can communicate about things. But the language itself is a lie. Like, every word I use is not the thing. It's by association.
I don't believe you.
So yeah, it seems like the crux, so to call something alive or dead, like the closest, I feel, my intuition is that the crux of this whole thing is related to entropy. Entropy is just such a new topic in the global human mind. It's hard for me to intuit even what entropy is. Like, it's everywhere. It dictates the flow of time. It's related to information. And it's what we're fighting against. That's what life is, right? Life is anti-entropic. That's what we are. That's what the market is. We're trying to export entropy, import energy, export entropy. And that seems to be like the closest definition to life, I think, is just an open system that's taking in energy, self-organizing, and exporting entropy.
This is very interesting, because there are so many different views to have on, and like, the physics definition of entropy is like, there's a theory that life forms exist not because they hinder entropy, but because they accelerate it. Like, at one point in the grand scheme of things, everything will turn into lead, and we will never see anything ever again, because everything will be dark. If you take from the Big Bang and forwards in time, that's where everything seems to be headed. And it's kind of a depressing thought, but it's a couple of billion years yet, so we have time to think about it, at least. But if you look at the sum total of what life on Earth is doing, it's actually speeding up entropy on a chemical level. But this is the thing about entropy. It all depends on what scale you're using. And from like a painting of a bright blue sky might seem entropic on a certain scale, but might seem like a beautiful blue sky on another. And there are so many fascinating things about entropy, and I'm starting to. I was reluctant to this idea, to viewing Bitcoin as a shield against entropy before, but I'm starting to like it a lot more when you think of it as like anti-entropy being life, and like Bitcoin helping us, shield us against the inevitable destruction of everything. But yeah. the many worlds theory is very interesting on this, and that entropy might just be what's left for our little timeline in the multiverse, and it is the way it is because of the probability of the other, which is a reflection of how big those infinite numbers of universi are. But as I said before, I think I came to the realization that without entropy, there would be no free will. Because entropy is if there was no entropy, the universe would be deterministic on all levels. We could like everything would be predetermined, and therefore there couldn't have been any free will. So
yeah, that's the paradox maybe that I'm detecting, is that if life is just the open system that's importing energy and exporting entropy, there's something else going on there, because life needs a little bit of entropy, right? That's kind of what mutation is. That's what free will is. There's something about this pure potential of chaos that's intrinsic to entropy that we need to be conscious almost.
Yeah, we are entropy machines. Taking a crap in the morning is creating entropy. You know, we leave a trail of entropy behind us all the time.
Yes.
When every time we open our freezer, we leave a trail of entropy behind us, you know?
Right. But we're also pushing back entropy through capital accumulation. You know, civilization really is the pushing back of entropy.
On a certain level, yes, but not on an atomic level, or like an iron atom does not care if it exists in the Empire State Building or if it's in a mountain somewhere.
Right.
That is also, it also has to do with how we put things into neat little boxes and define things.
Well, so that's a good point. Is entropy then, is it subjective or objective, or is it perhaps transjective too? Because I know one, well, let's just leave it there. Like, what is it? You know, because it's inherent to our experience of time, but it's also something formalized in the equations of thermodynamics, that it's an objective reality independent of consciousness. I can't get my head around that. Is it subjective, objective, transjective?
Well, it's a phenomenon we've observed. And in that sense, like, we have to draw a line between objective and subjective if we're going to discuss the two as two different realms at all. And like not seeing the world as the objective realm, that would like cancel out all physics. And that's obviously not very useful. Physics is very useful. We wouldn't be able to have this conversation without physics, of course. So all of these thinkers that came before us, I mean, we're standing on the shoulders of giants here, aren't we?
Right.
And Maxwell and his demon and entropy.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to bring up next, is Maxwell's demon makes entropy equivalent to uncertainty, as I understand it, which is really interesting, because it's like, okay, that's uncertainty clearly is a subjective phenomenon, right? One person could be certain about a certain outcome, or more certain, because they have a certain knowledge, whereas someone else could be very uncertain.
Yeah, but there's sort of the same dilemma there as with information and data, because to a physicist, they are really the same thing: uncertainty and entropy. Like, and information is in a way the resolution of uncertainty.
Yes. The resolution of entropy. Yeah. Same thing.
Yeah. So
that's what I was trying to describe earlier. I was saying, like, entropy, when I say it's like the data of the universe is entropic and it flows from the sphere of the unknown into the known, that is when it becomes information, because you're resolving entropy into a pattern, basically.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah.
But I don't know. My intuition is that it's the key, right? It's the key to maybe even solving the hard problem of consciousness itself. But I cannot get my head around entropy. It is a
no, it's
trip.
Yeah. and I think no one can really. And well, I think it's one of the more interesting aspects of reality, but scarcity is the other concept that Bitcoin really shed a light on, or illuminated the importance of,
right?
And how that gives things value.
So you
I don't really know where to take that next.
You mentioned earlier, this is another area I'd like to dig into a little bit. I know you said you've been reading a lot of Rothbard, and I read, as you mentioned, the Hillebrand series we did together, which was on the ethics of liberty by Rothbard. It seems to me like he has perhaps, through the scope of private property, derived an ought from an is, which is this classic, I think problem posed by Hume originally, the same thing that Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris debate. Can you do it?
Yeah.
Rothbard, if he hasn't done it, he's at least close. And the way I would articulate that is that the ought is to basically maximize individual freedom within the bounds of private property, right? Like that's what we ought to be doing, essentially maximizing our own freedom and option and doing whatever we want, so long as we don't violate the property of others. And then the is would be individual self-ownership, right? The thing from which property is derived.
Yeah, and this is very interesting, because this is one of the other parallels I draw between, and why I say that praxeology can function as a moral, something to base your morals around,
almost like a scientific religion.
Yeah, exactly. And Ayn Rand was onto this with the objectivist worldview, and I really like that, because it's not so much an ought in the sense that we should help each other. It's an egocentric ought.
Yes.
Like, if you want to reach your ends, you do it by acquiring certain means.
Yes.
And the best way, objectively speaking, to acquire means is to interact peacefully with others.
Yes.
Not to try to take them by force, because there's a game theory thing playing out there. The more people that do it voluntarily and trade, the bigger the market grows, and the better the output for everyone. Every ship rises with the tide. So we all get to a shot at reaching our ends that is better than it would have been if we would have interacted violently with each other. And I would say that you can draw an ought from an is there, and you can base your morals around that, around the notion that you believe that other conscious beings function in the same way you do. Basically, they have to assign value before they act.
Right.
That simple axiom that you have to evaluate first and act later, that you can really base your entire life around that if you just allow yourself to think it through and see where the vectors point.
I like what you said there, that there's this egocentric action you can take, really, which is just serving your own self-interest. But as long as it's done within the boundaries of private property, it's actually aligned to the interests of the collective. Right?
Exactly.
Because if I'm serving my own interests through innovating or harvesting some kind of wealth or energy, well, if I figure something out, then all of a sudden I have an incentive, again, egocentric incentive, to now sell that lesson into the marketplace. And then that informs everyone. So everyone benefits from my discovery as a result of me just following my own egocentric position, so long as I have the limiting principle of private property. Otherwise, that egocentric impulse can be taken beyond the bound of private property, person and property of others. And that's when things get bad. Because what are you doing? Like, if you inflict violence or you violate someone else's property, well, you're introducing entropy into the intersubjective fabric, right? All of a sudden, it's like, we had this protocol, you violated the protocol. Now the whole thing, the whole imagined order we've created for ourselves is at risk. There's no structural integrity.
Exactly. And egocentric has such a negative ring to it. I would say that, like, you're not being egocentric, you're being more assertive, because you allow yourself to demand to get paid for a service, and that's not egocentric. That's just the proper way to interact with other people. Like, it's not a violent way by any means, and like, it should be in your own self-interest to not cause others harm, because that in itself causes harm to you. There's something called mirror neurons. Did you hear about them?
Yes.
They've observed behaviors in monkeys and stuff that they can see that the neurons fire in one brain and they fire up in the other brain at the same time, and they mimic each other. And I think that might be a huge part of empathy.
Yes.
And why we have compassion and empathy, and that harming others is actually physically harming yourself.
Right.
You're supposed to feel bad if you beat someone up, and you're supposed to feel bad if you take their things, and you're especially supposed to feel bad if you kill them. So, so this is doing those things is not good for you.
Right.
And we can see this in like, do you think Hitler was a very happy person during the last years of the war? Of course not.
Of course not.
He had.
He's in hell.
Yeah, he was in hell, and it made him do atrocious things. But I think he was a victim of his own mind to the same extent as all these other victims, and like, it's not good for the perpetrator. That's what I'm saying. Crime is bad for everyone.
Absolutely.
And how do we remove it from the equation? We introduce something that reduces our incentive to use violence.
Yes.
And that's what Bitcoin is.
Yeah, you make it economically less feasible. That's the only way to get rid of crime. Like, you can't, you can do the moral crusade and you can talk about it, but if there's a carrot, then incentive out there, someone's going to do it. Someone's always going to do it.
Action always speaks louder than words.
Right.
And this is so crucial, because there's with Bitcoin, the pen is literally more mightier than the sword. The pen is literally mightier than the sword, because information is more powerful than violence in Bitcoin.
Right.
The information about the thing is the thing. The knowing about it is owning it.
Right.
So we've turned something that this is back to the informational element. We now have a thing that is strictly informational. It's not a rock that you can use a gold bar to inflict harm on another person. You can bash his head in with a gold bar. You cannot do that with Bitcoin, because it's just information. You interact with it through speech and through trading information. And trading is information. That back to this, there's something here.
It's purely volitional, right? There's no
volitional.
There's no involuntary element to it.
Yeah, volitional. I have to write that down, because that's going into the book.
Happy to help. I want to echo something you said earlier too, where egocentric has a bad connotation, but I should add here, like, it does not preclude selfless behavior. Like, egocentric does not mean I can't go start a charity, right? Or go perform some act of altruism.
No,
so long as it's done freely, that fits perfectly within the private property, I guess, moral and practical framework that Rothbard lays out.
Yeah, this ties into praxeology perfectly, because like being rational in the praxeology logical sense of the word is not being morally correct or anything. It's just acting in a certain way voluntarily to acquire some end. It's being so there's a semantics thing there too. I mean, yeah,
it's really interesting. I found myself too just the Hillebrand series and reading that book really, I think Rothbard's views have not been assimilated into global consciousness at all. Like I guess you could say something even larger, like humanity has a blind spot when it comes to praxeology overall.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Like it's just the word, even the word, like if you don't have, I didn't know the word until I got into Bitcoin.
No, you put it in an excellent way in another pod we did, and you said praxeology is to the subjective what mathematics is to the objective.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. And because it really is, it's the great missing school subject.
Yeah.
And no wonder, because look at who's financing all the schools. I mean, praxeology, no single entity can gain from praxeology being taught anywhere.
Right.
So there's no incentive for anyone to teach praxeology to anyone else. There is an incentive to teach an engineer mathematics. If you want to put an engineer somewhere in society and build a bridge, you need to teach him. You need to teach him mathematics first.
Right.
But there's no real incentive for any leader of any sort to teach praxeology to others.
Does Bitcoin fix that too? Because I guess that's what we're doing right now, right?
It does, and that's the beautiful thing, because all of a sudden we can put aside our egos and we can think about the greater good, because we have the time and the means to do that.
Yeah.
Which we didn't have before, when we were stuck in the hamster's wheel and the hamster was dead, but the wheel was keeping on spinning and spinning and spinning.
Right.
I mean, the hamster was dead inside, but the wheel kept on spinning. So this is the beautiful thing. We're through the discovery of Bitcoin, so many of us are discovering praxeology and Rothbard and all of these guys, and we're spreading the word about that. And there's so much profound stuff I mean, Rothbard's The Ethics of Liberty. I think it scares a lot of people away because it says some harsh things about a fetus being a parasite on the mother and stuff like that. He uses wording that is not there. There are no filters on it. He's just laying it out there as it is, with no
through the lens of property.
Through the lens of property, and it is the proper way of. I mean,
proper.
Read that. Yeah, the proper way to look at property.
Yeah.
As we say, if I raise my arm, I'm the one that did that. So my arm is my property.
Yes.
If you say that it isn't, you are using your vocal cords to say that it isn't, and that's your property. Your vocal cord is your property. So like and everything we make with our hands, everything we put together is a product of our body, which is our property. And that's where morals should stem from. And it's back to the schoolyard again. This is so basic. Don't kill each other. Don't hurt each other. Don't take each other's stuff.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we need to grow up as a species effectively. And then I would point out here too, this is a hard one. That is the essence of fiat. When someone attempts to make the patterns that they generate with their vocal cords as a substitute for movement of your left arm, like you're a fiat perpetrator.
Exactly.
I want to be able to say something and have your action take place. That is it contradicts reality so blatantly and obviously. It's like and I've had arguments with people about this. They're like, I don't believe in that self-ownership, that individual self-ownership. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, you're actually sitting here owning yourself, posing an argument against individual self-ownership. Like, your argument against individual self-ownership is an expression of your individual self-ownership.
It's oxymoronic on so many levels. It's like the word free trade agreement. Right. It's oxymoronic to its core. Like, and this is the thing, but I hope that Bitcoin does with others what it has done to me and what it has done to you. Because I mean, I think both you and I had different views of reality before Bitcoin than we do after.
Certainly.
And
every
we've
way.
we've not, like, I mean, we've come to similar conclusions, but we've done it from very different angles. And like, this is happening to so many of us now. And it's so great to see this community grow. And I just wish that more people saw, like, because there are many thinkers Many of them have been on this show, and they all have very interesting ideas about stuff, but it's like they have a blind spot to Bitcoin. They haven't yet they haven't yet seen this thing, and seen it for what it is, and seen it how like just you don't even have to believe in it. You just or think that it works. So you can think that Bitcoin will go to zero at some point, but just allow yourself to think, if this thing works as advertised, what does that imply?
Right.
So that's the thing. If this truly is rules without rulers, what does that imply? If we have an absolutely scarce element zero that is teleportable, indestructible, all this stuff,
property independent of state,
independent of everything, property that is in the informational, true intellectual property, the first intellectual property that is actually a property.
No, it's a great point. And I mean, that's the namesake of the show, what is money? Because I feel like if you just ask that question seriously, like if you really take it seriously and just keep asking the question until you, like, I haven't figured it out, right? I do the damn show on it. I've been thinking about Bitcoin nonstop for 5 years. I can't give you one clean answer for what is money. I could just lean on the Austrian answer, universal medium of exchange, but it's a lot of things, right? And it uncovers a lot of rabbit holes. I really believe anyone that asks themselves that question, they do end up in the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And then my bet, I guess, is that it will be similarly transformative for people as it has been for me and you and others.
We've asked ourselves, what is entropy in this episode as well. Another question I'd like to pose is, what is energy? Because like you can, I think in a way, Bitcoin is much more akin to energy, because all the types of money that preceded Bitcoin, none of them were absolutely scarce. None of them had these amazing properties that Bitcoin does. So I think in a way it's degrading to Bitcoin to call it money, because by money we mean something inferior to it, by the definition of the word, because we've never seen anything that is absolutely scarce, and like we've never had a way of converting electrical energy into subjective energy, if you will, or the ability to store electrical energy, convert it into another form. It's not kinetic energy, it's mathematical energy, or
digital energy, something.
I hate the word digital, but mathematical energy, let's call it that. But and you can store it and send it through time and space without loss. Other, like fiat money, is good for sending across space. That's why it took over the world. And gold was good for storing value over time. That's why it got hoarded by supervillains in vaults at Fort Knox and stuff. So but Bitcoin does both. And electricity is a it's good at neither. You can't send it across vast distances without a loss of it,
right?
And you can't store it in batteries without the loss of it. Batteries are still crap compared to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin can store it through space and time, and you don't even need that much bandwidth. You need a very limited Bitcoin internet connection, and you can use Bitcoin everywhere. And it's not going away. It is there. It's an emergent phenomenon. Like I said, every aspect, every single aspect of it, it fuels its success as the other aspect of it, and it's just happening at every level of society everywhere. Like nation states are adopting it, big corporations are adopting it, and most of all, normal people are adopting it. They're seeing that they can now play the same game as every other entity in the human race. There's no us versus them anymore. We're all the same. And it's just Yeah,
it's well
I
said.
sound like an evangelist.
Well, I think we are. I said the same thing in a different way, that I think the emergence of Bitcoin is teaching us one of two things. And it's either that money is way more important than we ever thought it was. Like the fact that corrupt money has just been a real bane for humanity, or Bitcoin is way more than money, right?
Yeah.
And maybe, I don't know which one it is really. So
no, that's a good way of putting it.
But I think the key, again, the gateway to walk through is like, if you just ask what is money, you end up in the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And that's when you discover all these other weird questions, like what is energy? What is entropy? What is value? What is government? Look,
what the hell is a brunch?
What is brunch? Knut, this has been awesome. We'll do it again. Could you please let my audience know where they can find out more about you or your work?
Yeah, my main channel is Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Knut Svanholm. And I have a Patreon these days. I've never used it before, but since I'm doing Bitcoin full time, I'm trying out different things. My books, you can find my books on Amazon. Sovereignty Through Mathematics and Independence Reimagined. They're also translated into a couple of other languages, which you can find either on Amazon or through Consensus Network or Apricot Media, which are two Bitcoin publishing houses in Finland and Germany, which are very, very interesting companies. Looking forward to working a lot more with them. Maybe you know a couple of those guys, Robert, I don't know. Anyway, that's a big space. Yeah, and what more? I have a Telegram channel. Haven't got I have a YouTube channel, but I never use it. I'm thinking of starting a pod after finishing this book, but yeah, we'll see what happens. If you follow me on Twitter, of course, I'm on Mastodon as well as every other Bitcoiner, which is sort of where we're all going to migrate if Twitter fails. And now that Jack left, yeah. So that's basically it.
Awesome.
Yes,
well,
search for my name and you'll find the stuff. Yeah, I should mention the videos we made. I made some videos with Guy Swan and Yoni Appelberg. One of them is called Everything Divided by 21 Million. Another is about the separation of money and state, which was an article I wrote for Bitcoin Magazine. And that had quite a few. I think it's 3 different animated iterations of it. And that's the one I'm proud of. There's one on shitcoins and Bitcoins and yeah, all sorts of stuff. So Yoni Appelberg's YouTube channel, check that out as well. He makes excellent little animations.
Awesome.
Of Bitcoin stuff. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you doing this, Knut. We will link to your Twitter and some of these other pages in the show notes, and we'll do this again soon.
And subscribe to Citadel 21 magazine.
And
right. Yeah, I should shill a lot of other stuff too. Yeah,
all right.
You know where to find the stuff.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Robert. I enjoyed this a lot.